Okay, Professor Coomer's classroom. If you are in Essay 2, you're probably going to want to do some quotation or a paraphrase. So let's cover how this is done. Now, real quick, if you're more of a reading learner, take a look at the handbook, the writer's handbook, and then also the textbook. Both of those are great resources for how this is done, and they're going to give you stuff that's a little bit more in depth than what I'm going to do in this video. But I want to give you an idea of the basics of how this works. Now, when it comes to quotation and paraphrasing, the big difference between the two is that when you quote, if you're quoting somebody, it's got to be word for word. You can't halfway remember it and just say, quote. No, it has to be exactly what they said. And usually the only time we want to use a quote is if the way the person said it makes a difference. You know, if you think about whenever, I don't know, if you ever got in trouble as a kid and maybe your mom or dad found out, and maybe your brother or sister told you, hey, mom or dad, they're mad at you. And what exactly did they say? Tell me exactly word for word and how they even said it. You know, how did their eyes and ears look whenever they said it, right? You want to know the details. Now, that would be when you're looking for an exact quote, because the way it was said makes a difference. Now, whenever it doesn't really matter how it was said, but it more or less matters what was said, like the real, what I might call the meat of the issue, really the essence of the issue. What is the essence of what was said? That's whenever we would go to a paraphrase. And that's going to be the most common the most commonly used thing that you should really think about. Most students want to do quotes because they're easy, because I can just copy and paste. But when it comes down to it, a college-educated writer should be able to paraphrase. Now let's talk about how these two things work. Let's see here. I'm going to try to make sure you can see it really well. Now, first of all, when it comes to a quote, there is a certain way that you're going to want this to look on your paper. So let's suppose you've got two sentences from an article that you would like to quote. Okay, great. Now, we know that we're doing quotes, so there's going to be quotation marks. So yes, you're going to have quotation marks around the whatever was written. Now notice here, I don't know if you can see this very well, but right now I have the quotation marks on the outside of the period. So any punctuation that they have on their sentence, you always want the quotation marks around it. So that goes out, the punctuation is inside of the quotation. Now the thing is, this is not enough to work in an essay. We have to introduce it. So what we're going to do is we will have some introductory words of your own. So when we say introductory words of your own, you might say, you know, according to, Smith, that would be the very least that I would expect from you. Because first of all, who's Smith? You should tell me who Smith is. Is it Fred Smith? And then who's Fred Smith? Why should I care? You should always have some kind of lead-in information that gives your reader a reason to care why this is important. Because anybody can say something. You can quote anyone. You can just go to the grocery store and bump into somebody and get a quote from them. It only matters if it's coming from maybe an expert in the field, or maybe you're reporting on an incident that happened and you find an eyewitness. Well, that's important that your reader knows it was an eyewitness. This is where you put that information. You always put the information as you introduce the quote. So whenever your reader reads the quote, they're like, oh, okay, this means something because guess who said it? Now I care. Now I know why I should care about this quote. Okay, so let's suppose it was coming from a textbook. Like for instance, if you're quoting from one of the readings that I require you to do, it's going to be coming from a reading source or a printed source. So you notice I'm going to take the period out, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to add parentheses, and then I'm going to put the period on the end of the parentheses. Now, what do I put in the parentheses? So depending on where you're going in college, it's going to be, it'll vary. But in this class, in Comp 1, we are going to use Mla format. Now, your writer's handbook has all of the Mla format rules, so I'd like you to take a look at that. But the quick rule that we always want to apply to quotations is that we want to know what page this quote appeared on. and we need to know who said it. So those two things, okay? What page, who said it. Now we know who said it because we have the author's last name. So we always need the author's last name. But we don't know what page it was on. Okay, so that is why we will put, maybe it was on page 14. Now you notice how I did not write the word page. I didn't put P. It's just the number 14. Because I know, and your reader will know, if there is a number in the parentheses, it's a page number. There's no other number that you're going to put there. Now, this is where it's really important to understand. We're using MLA format. We're not using APA format. We're not using any other format. MLA format, the only numbers that are going to go there are page numbers. Okay? So you don't have to tell us it's a page. We know. Now, let's just suppose that I didn't give you the name of the author in the introductory words, okay? According to a prominent scholar. Maybe that's what I put, okay? Still, it's not very good, but let's just suppose, however I introduced the quote, it didn't have the author's last name in it. Well, in that case, we still need the author's last name, so we're going to put it in the parentheses at the end. Now, you'll notice that I have Smith and then I have 14. The page number's always got to be there. Now, Smith is the first thing and then the page number. It's always the author's last name and then the page number. Now, there's no punctuation or dash or comma or anything here. It's just a space between the author's last name and the page number. Now, there's a lot of rules that will apply to what you put in here, and it's going to vary depending on how many authors there were, how many pages you're quoting from. There's going to be some variations, but this is really kind of the basics that I want to go over, especially this early in the semester on Essay 2. I would like you to take a look at the textbook and at the work or the handbook so that you get a better feel for how this works. Now, let's talk about paraphrasing. We've already talked about the basics of quotation. Let's talk about paraphrasing. Now, when it comes to paraphrasing, the rule is that it's got to be your own words. You're going to put it in whatever words that you would like to put it in. And at the same time, you have to attribute the idea to the original author. Now, we do this more often in real life than we ever quote because it's very hard to remember exact quotes. In real life, most of the time you kind of remember the gist, right? You remember kind of what the author said, and you're pretty clear on what the author said, but you're not going to put it in those exact words. You're going to put it in your own words, okay? So let's suppose there was an author that was talking about a certain statistic that you want to put into your essay. So you might say, Sally Smith, really on the Smith kick today. Sally Smith reports, let's see here. Sally Smith reports that 2 out of every 3 dentists agree that maybe Colgate toothpaste is the best. Okay, so this isn't an exact quote, right? I'm just telling you what someone else said. In fact, I'm literally saying it that way. I'm saying Sally Smith says this, right? Well, the thing is, that's fine. That's what you're doing is you're paraphrasing. Now, the thing is, we still have to make sure we give the author's last name and the page number wherever this particular author makes this claim, but we don't have to do specific words. We can put it in our own words, and we don't have to format it exactly the same. In fact, we're supposed to change it up as much as possible. It needs to be your own original words I don't want you, and you can't like just change words around in a quote and then suddenly you've got a paraphrase. That's not how that works. But we still need to take the period out and we're going to put that page number. Maybe she also made it on page 14. Okay, great. Well, this is a paraphrase. There's no quotation marks. It's not word for word, but we are giving the author, whoever said what, we're giving that person their due. We're giving them credit for the idea that we're conveying. And we're also telling our readers, hey, if you don't believe me, you can go to page 14 and read it for yourself. A paraphrase is generally the one that we want to do the most often because a paraphrase is easier for your reader to understand, or at least that's the goal. The goal of a paraphrase, I don't know, well, first of all, maybe you've been hanging out with a friend and somebody comes up and says, hey guys, blah, 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 right? And then you understand what the person said, but maybe your friend isn't so smart. And so your friend's like, what? And so you have to say, oh, I'm sorry, I've got my friend here. My friend doesn't, not very smart. And then you put it in your own words. You know your friend. You know how to say the same thing to your friend so that your friend's going to understand it. And then you say it to your friend and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And you're paraphrasing. And that's the beauty of paraphrasing. Maybe you understand something that's said in a really complex way. You understand it, but you don't want your audience to be confused. Well, that's perfect time for a paraphrase. You just put it in your own words in a way that the audience is going to understand. And hey, you're doing your audience a favor. You're paraphrasing. You're going to give the author their due. Everything's good. Okay. And again, just like in quotations, there are some other rules when things get a little bit more complicated when it comes to paraphrasing. So I would like you to take a look at the workbook, or not the workbook, the handbook. All right, you're going to look at the handbook and the textbook for all the little details. If you take a look at the handbook especially, there are a lot of MLA details that you should know, depending on maybe how many authors you're listing, maybe if it's something that was cited by another author and you're paraphrasing what another person paraphrased or quoted. So there are some instances where it's not going to be just so easy. But in Essay 2, it probably will just be this easy. Okay? So, all right. So those are two big things I want you to understand about quotations and paraphrasing. For everything else, take a look at the handbook or the future videos I'm going to make. All right, go ahead and get started.